The pilot announced my name mid-flight and said, "Come forward." It wasn't a request. The voice, a calm, disembodied baritone, crackling through the cabin's speaker system, was stripped of all warmth, a sterile command that sliced through the monotonous drone of the engines. My name, Elara Vance, echoed in the pressurized quiet, and 100 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me. They were curious, annoyed, a few vaguely alarmed. My heart didn't just start beating faster. It felt like it had been struck by a hammer, a single brutal impact that sent a sickening jolt through my entire body. Beside me, my 7-year-old son, Leo, looked up from his comic book, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mommy," he said your name. On my other side, 5-year-old Maya was asleep, her small head resting against my arm, her breath a warm, innocent puff against my skin. For a fraction of a second, the world felt like a dream, a bizarre, anxiety-fueled nightmare from which I would surely wake. But the flight attendant, a woman with a practiced plastic smile that now looked strained, was already walking down the aisle toward me, her steps too quick, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that was anything but reassuring. The pilot repeated it. "Elara Vance, please come to the cockpit immediately." The word "please" was an afterthought, a hollow piece of procedural politeness. The command was absolute. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind raced, a frantic scramble for a plausible explanation. A family emergency back home? My mother? No, they would have my phone number. A problem with my ticket? Unlikely. We were halfway across the country, 35,000 feet above the patchwork quilt of America. The flight attendant reached my row. "Ma'am," she said, her voice a low, urgent murmur. "Please, come with me. Leave your bags." Her eyes flickered to my children, a quick, almost imperceptible glance that was filled with something I couldn't decipher. Pity? Fear? It was the look that finally broke through my paralysis. I gently eased Maya's head onto a pillow and whispered to Leo, "Stay here with your sister, sweetie. Don't let her wake up. I'll be right back." He nodded, his eyes wide and serious, suddenly looking much older than 7. Following the attendant down the narrow aisle felt like walking a tightrope. Every face I passed was a blur of speculation. I could feel their thoughts, their silent questions branding my skin. Is she a doctor? A terrorist? What could she have possibly done? The door to the cockpit was a formidable barrier between the mundane world of passengers and the secret, complex world of flight. She rapped twice, a coded knock, and the door clicked open. I was ushered inside the cramped space, a dizzying array of lights, dials, and screens. The pilot, a man with graying temples and a stern jaw, swiveled in his seat. The co-pilot didn't even look at me. His focus remained on the horizon, a line of impossible blue. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in a bubble of terrifying silence. "Mrs. Vance," the pilot said, his voice the same one from the speaker. But now it was close, real, and laced with a gravity that made the air feel heavy. "We received a communication from ground control, an anonymous tip. It was specific." He paused, his gaze unwavering. I could only stand there, my hands clasped so tightly, my knuckles were white, my throat too dry to form a question. He didn't need me to ask. He continued, his words precise and devastating. "The tip claimed that the 2 children's water bottles you brought on board have been tampered with, that they contain a lethal substance." The world tilted. The hum of the engines faded into a distant roar. The blinking lights on the console swam before my eyes. My children, Leo and Maya, their colorful cartoon character water bottles packed so neatly in our carry-on bag, the bag I had just been told to leave behind. I remembered my sister Lena, her bright, reassuring smile, as she handed me the bag at the airport gate just a few hours ago. "I packed snacks and drinks for the kids," she'd said, her voice warm with sisterly affection. "Just to make your life easier, Alara. You've been through so much, so much." The words were a cruel understatement. My husband, David, had died 6 weeks ago. A sudden massive heart attack at 42. Healthy, vibrant David, gone. Lena and her husband, Mark, had been my rocks, my pillars of support. They'd handled everything, insisting I come stay with them, to let them take care of me and the kids. This flight was taking us to them, to the new life they had promised to help me build from the ashes of the old one. The pilot was still talking, his voice a steady anchor in my spiraling panic. "We have to treat this as a credible threat. We are diverting the plane to the nearest major airport. Law enforcement will meet us on the ground. A flight attendant is with your children. She has been instructed not to let them eat or drink anything at all." I finally found my voice, a ragged whisper. Who would do that? The pilot shook his head, his expression a mask of professional empathy. "We don't know, ma'am. The tip was untraceable, but they knew your name, your flight number, and your seat assignment." My mind was a blizzard of images. Lena handing me the bag. Mark giving me a tight, almost suffocating hug, whispering, "We'll take care of you. You and the kids will be safe with us." The cloying sweetness of the special herbal tea Lena had insisted I drink every night for the past month, claiming it would help me sleep. The same tea she'd made for David the night before he died. A cold, horrifying certainty began to crystallize in the depths of my gut. A truth so monstrous, so unthinkable, that my entire being recoiled from it. It couldn't be. Not Lena, not my own sister. But as I stood there, suspended, between the sky and the earth, I knew. I knew with a chilling clarity that this wasn't an anonymous threat from a stranger. This was a message. This was the final brutal act in a play I hadn't even known I was a part of. And the curtain was just beginning to rise. Inside the cockpit, the air was thick with a sterile professional tension. The co-pilot spoke into his headset in a low, clipped monotone, relaying coordinates and flight data. The pilot, whose name I learned was Captain Evans, kept his eyes on me, assessing my reaction. He was looking for hysteria, for a breakdown, but all he found was a strange, terrifying calm that had settled over me like a shroud. The initial shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of ice. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm just moments before, was now unnervingly clear. Every detail, every memory from the past 6 weeks began to rearrange itself, snapping into a new, grotesque pattern. "Mrs. Vance, are you all right?" Captain Evans asked, his voice softening slightly. I nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. "Yes, the water bottles. They're in the blue backpack in the overhead compartment above my seat." I described the bag, the specific bottles with Leo's dinosaur stickers and Maya's unicorn design, my voice devoid of emotion. It felt as if I were describing objects that belonged to someone else. He relayed the information into his own headset. "A flight attendant will retrieve the bag and secure it. No one will touch it until the authorities are on board." He paused. "Do you have any idea at all, who might want to harm your children?" The question hung in the air, heavy and obscene. How could I answer that? How could I voice the suspicion that was now a roaring certainty in my soul? My sister is trying to kill my children. The words were unthinkable, a violation of the natural order of the world. Lena, who had held my hand at our mother's funeral. Lena, who was godmother to Maya. Lena, whose laughter had been the soundtrack to my entire childhood. I remembered her at David's memorial service, her face a perfect mask of grief, her arm wrapped around my shoulders. "He was like a brother to me, Alara," she had sobbed. "I don't know how we'll go on without him." I had believed her. I had clung to her, my only remaining family, my anchor in a sea of sorrow. Now her grief seemed like a performance, a meticulously rehearsed charade. The pieces were clicking into place with the sickening finality of a lock tumbler. David's life insurance policy, a substantial one. He had insisted on it when Leo was born. "It's for you and the kids, Alara, so you'll always be safe." Mark, Lena's husband, had helped us set it up. He was a financial advisor, after all. He knew all the best policies, the biggest payouts. I remembered a conversation a few weeks before David died. Mark had been over for dinner, talking about his own financial struggles, a bad investment that had gone sour. He'd laughed it off, but I'd seen the flicker of desperation in his eyes. He'd asked about our policy casually, asking if we'd updated it recently. David had confirmed we had. "Good man," Mark had said, clapping him on the back. "Always smart to be prepared." Prepared for what? For this, the herbal tea. Lena had started bringing it over a month before David's death. "It's a special blend," she'd explained, "from a little boutique downtown. It's amazing for stress, helps regulate the heart, too." David had been working long hours, stressed about a big project. He drank it every night. The night he died, he'd complained of a strange numbness in his lips and a racing heart, but we'd dismissed it as anxiety. The paramedics had called it a textbook cardiac arrest, a widowmaker. No one had questioned it. A healthy man in his early 40s, dead from a heart attack. Tragic, but not unheard of. There was no autopsy. I was too consumed by grief to demand one, and the coroner saw no reason to perform one. Natural causes, the death certificate read. A neat, tidy explanation, but it wasn't his heart. It was the tea. It had to be. Lena had been slowly poisoning him, a little bit each night, until his heart simply gave out. And now it was my children's turn. Why? The insurance money. As David's sole beneficiary, it all came to me. But if I died and my children died, who would be next in line? As my only living relative, my designated guardian for the children in my will, it would all go to Lena, all of it. The house, the savings, and the $2 million life insurance policy. It was a motive so cold, so profoundly evil. It felt like something from a movie, not my life. My quiet suburban life with PTA meetings and soccer practice. Captain Evans was waiting for my answer. I looked him in the eye, the icy calm in my veins solidifying into a resolve I didn't know I possessed. "I have an idea," I said, my voice steady. "But I can't be wrong about this. I need to be sure." I needed proof. An accusation this monstrous without irrefutable evidence would make me sound like a hysterical, grieving widow. They might even turn the suspicion back on me. The thought was chilling. "When we land," I continued, "I need to speak with whoever is in charge. I need them to understand that this isn't random. This is connected to my husband's death." The captain nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He had seen the shift in me, the transition from victim to something else, something more dangerous. He turned back to the controls. "We'll be on the ground in 45 minutes. Hang in there, Mrs. Vance." I was escorted out of the cockpit by the same flight attendant. Her name tag read Maria. Her professional mask had slipped, and her face was etched with genuine concern. "Your children are fine," she whispered as we walked. "I told them we were playing a quiet game. They haven't asked for a drink." As I slid back into my seat, the manufactured normalcy of the cabin felt obscene. People were watching movies, reading books, complaining about the diversion. They were living in a world that still made sense. My world had fractured, the foundations of my life revealed to be a lie. Leo looked at me, his eyes full of questions. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" I forced a smile, a painful stretching of muscles that had forgotten how. "Everything is fine, sweetie. The plane just needs to make a quick stop. It's a little adventure." His face relaxed. He trusted me. That trust felt like a physical weight on my chest. I looked at Maya, still sleeping, her small hand curled into a fist, a picture of perfect innocence. A wave of pure primal rage washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. They had tried to take this from me. They had tried to extinguish these two beautiful, bright lights. Lena, Mark, my family, the people who were supposed to protect us. The adventure was just beginning, and I would see it through to the end. I had to. For David, and for the two small sleeping children who trusted me to keep them safe from the monsters in the world, never suspecting that the monsters had been inside our home all along. The 45 minutes before we landed were the longest of my life. I sat perfectly still, a statue of composure on the outside, a raging inferno within. I couldn't touch my children. I was afraid my trembling hands would betray the terror that gripped me. I was afraid the rage radiating from me was a palpable thing, a heat they might feel. So I just watched them. I memorized the curve of Maya's cheek, the way her eyelashes feathered against her skin. I watched the focused intensity on Leo's face as he read his comic, his lips moving silently with the words. These were the lives my sister had valued at $2 million. My role now was to be the perfect mother, the calm center of their universe, while simultaneously planning for a war I never thought I'd have to fight. My mind became a cold, calculating machine. I replayed every conversation, every visit, every shared meal from the last few months. Lena's constant questions about my finances, disguised as helpful concern. "Are you managing okay, Alara? David took care of everything. I know this must be so hard." Mark's off-color jokes about getting away with the perfect crime. We'd all laughed. It was just Mark being Mark. A little too brash, a little too cynical. But the laughter now curdled in my memory. I remembered Lena's insistence on cleaning out David's office herself. "It'll be too painful for you," she'd said, her eyes brimming with manufactured tears. "Let me handle it." What had she been looking for? The insurance paperwork? The will? Had she been destroying something or planting something? The flight attendant, Maria, passed by my seat, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, significant moment. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a small gesture of solidarity that meant the world. She knew. She didn't know the details, but she knew the gravity of the situation. She was my silent ally in a cabin full of oblivious strangers. When the plane finally began its descent, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. the moment my suspicion would either be validated or dismissed as madness. The landing was smooth, but it felt like a crash to me. The moment the wheels touched the tarmac, a profound sense of finality washed over me. There was no going back. As the plane taxied toward a remote section of the airport, away from the main terminal, I could see them. A cluster of official-looking vehicles, police cars, an ambulance, a dark, unmarked sedan. They were waiting for us, for me. The engine powered down, and the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign, turning off, sounded unnaturally loud. An announcement came over the intercom, not from the pilot, but from Maria. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security issue, we ask that you please remain in your seats. Law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft. Please remain calm and follow their instructions." A murmur of discontent and alarm rippled through the cabin. I ignored it. I gently woke Maya, my touch as soft as I could make it. Her eyes fluttered open, still cloudy with sleep. "Are we at Auntie Lena's?" she mumbled. The name was a knife in my gut. "Almost, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick. "We just have to talk to some people first." 3 figures boarded the plane. 2 were uniformed officers, their faces grim and professional. The 3rd was a woman in a plain pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had the sharp, intelligent eyes of someone who had seen the worst of human nature and was rarely surprised. She walked directly to my seat. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but authoritative. "I'm Detective Miller. We need you and your children to come with us." She didn't look at the other passengers. Her focus was entirely on me. I nodded, unbuckling my seatbelt and helping the kids with theirs. "The backpack," I said, my voice low. "The blue one with the water bottles." "It's already been secured, ma'am," the detective replied. "It's on its way to the lab." The walk off the plane was a blur. The uniformed officers formed a subtle barrier, shielding us from the curious stares of the other passengers. As we stepped out of the plane and onto the metal staircase, the air, even filled with the scent of jet fuel, felt impossibly fresh. I took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it had reached the bottom of my lungs since the pilot had said my name. Down on the tarmac, they led us to the unmarked sedan. Detective Miller opened the back door for me and the children. "We're just going to a quiet room inside the airport where we can talk," she said, her tone professional, but not unkind. As I settled into the back seat with Leo and Maya pressed close against me, I saw them handle the blue backpack. A man in a hazmat suit was carefully placing it into a sealed biohazard container. The sight was so surreal, so clinical, it drove the reality of the situation home with brutal force. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a sick prank. This was real. Someone had packed poison for my children. In the sterile, windowless room deep within the airport's administrative wing, Leo and Maya were given coloring books and juice boxes that came from a vending machine, opened in front of my eyes by a uniformed officer. They were blissfully unaware, chattering about the police cars and the excitement of it all. I sat across a metal table from Detective Miller. Another officer, a man named Peterson, stood silently by the door. "Okay, Mrs. Vance," Miller began, opening a notebook. "Let's start from the beginning. Captain Evans said you might know who is behind this." I took a shaky breath and began to talk. I told her everything about David's sudden death, about Lena and Mark's unwavering support, their insistence that we come live with them. I told her about the life insurance policy, about Mark's financial troubles, about the will that named Lena the children's guardian should anything happen to me. And I told her about the tea, the special herbal tea that Lena had sworn by. As I spoke, the story sounded more and more insane, a tangled web of domesticity and monstrous greed. I saw a flicker of skepticism in Miller's eyes, a grieving widow, paranoid, making wild accusations against her only family. I knew how it must sound. "My sister," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "She packed that bag. She handed it to me at the gate. She hugged my children and told them she couldn't wait to see them." I looked Detective Miller straight in the eye, willing her to believe me. My husband was murdered, and she was trying to finish the job. Miller listened, her expression unreadable, making notes in her book. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "Mrs. Vance," she said finally, her tone measured. "These are very serious allegations." "I know," I whispered, "but they're true. We'll know more when the lab results come back on the contents of the water bottles. That's our priority. In the meantime, we need to corroborate your story. We'll look into your husband's death, into Mark and Lena's financials. But we need more than just suspicion." She was right. I needed proof. My word against theirs. They were the grieving, supportive family. I was the recent widow, likely unstable in their eyes. The power dynamic was terrifyingly skewed against me. An idea began to form in my mind, born of desperation and a deep, intuitive understanding of my sister's fatal flaws. Her arrogance, her belief that she was smarter than everyone else. "Let me call her," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "Let me call Lena, right now, from here. You can listen, you can record it. I'll tell her the flight was diverted. I'll tell her there was a security scare, something about a substance found on the plane. I won't mention the water bottles specifically. I'll play the frantic, scared sister. Let's see how she reacts. Let's see what she says when she thinks her plan has gone wrong." Detective Miller looked at me, a long, appraising stare. The skepticism in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a dawning respect. She saw the fighter beneath the victim. She exchanged a look with Officer Peterson. Then she nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "All right, Mrs. Vance," she said, pulling out her phone. "Let's make a phone call." The small, sterile room felt like a stage. Detective Miller placed her department-issued phone on the table, its speaker function enabled, a recording app silently capturing everything. Officer Peterson stood by the door, a silent sentinel. My own phone was evidence, taken for analysis of recent calls and messages. I sat there, my hands clasped on the metal table, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This had to work. It was my only chance to turn their web of deceit back on them. Miller gave me a curt nod. I took a deep, shuddering breath and told her Lena's number. The phone rang once, twice, a sound that seemed to echo the frantic beating of my heart. On the third ring, she answered. "Ilara, is everything okay? I was just tracking your flight online, and it said you were diverted. I've been so worried." Her voice was a perfect symphony of sisterly concern, laced with just the right amount of panic. It was a performance so flawless, it made my stomach churn. For a moment, a sliver of doubt pierced my resolve. Could I be wrong? Could this all be a horrible, tragic coincidence? But then I looked through the small window in the door and saw my son, Leo, showing his drawing to a kind-faced policewoman. The doubt vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Lena," I began, injecting a tremor into my voice, channeling the real fear I felt into a performance of my own. Oh God, Lena, it was terrifying. What happened? Are the kids okay? The question was immediate, sharp. They're fine, I said, making my voice sound breathless. They diverted us. We're on the ground in, I don't even know where, some city in the Midwest. They won't tell us anything. There was some kind of security threat. I let that hang in the air, a baited hook. I could almost feel her on the other end, processing, calculating. A security threat? What do you mean, like a bomb? Her voice was tight. I don't know, they're not saying. They came on the plane, police and everything. They took some things to be tested. They said there was a report of a possible contamination. I deliberately kept it vague. Contamination, a word that could mean anything. I needed her to fill in the blanks herself. There was a pause, a silence that stretched for a few seconds too long. In that silence, I could hear the gears of her mind turning. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted. The panic was still there, but it was underpinned by something else, a sharp, analytical edge. Contamination? What things did they take? Did they take your bags? Just some carry-on items from the cabin, I stammered, playing my part. From a few different passengers, it's all so confusing. I was counting on her arrogance, her need to control the situation. She wouldn't be able to resist asking the one question that would betray her. Did they take the blue backpack? She asked, her voice a little too casual. The one I packed for the kids? Bingo. My eyes locked with Detective Miller's. I saw a flicker of confirmation in her gaze. She knew. Yes, I whispered, letting a sob catch in my throat. Yes, they did. Why? No reason, she said quickly, her voice suddenly strained. I put those juice boxes in there. Maybe one of them leaked. Oh, Alara, what if it was my fault? What if a juice box went bad and caused this whole scare? I would feel just awful. It was a brilliant pivot, plausible, innocent, and it painted her as the victim of a terrible misunderstanding. But she had taken the bait. She had identified the specific bag, the specific target. She knew exactly what was in those water bottles, and now she was trying to create a cover story. I'm sure it's not that, Lena, I said, trying to sound reassuring. It's probably nothing. Let me talk to Mark, she said suddenly. He's right here. He's better at this stuff than I am. The phone rustled, and then Mark's smooth, confident voice came on the line. Ilara, what's going on? Lena's a mess. Mark, I'm so scared, I cried, laying it on thick. They're talking about contamination, about some kind of chemical. The police are here. I could practically hear the condescending smile in his voice as he replied. Now, Ilara, don't get hysterical. It's probably just some idiot's idea of a prank. You know how crazy people are these days. They'll test the items, find nothing, and you'll be on your way in no time. Are the kids all right? They're fine. They're in another room. Good. Don't let them see you upset. The most important thing is to stay calm and answer their questions. Just be honest. You have nothing to hide. The hypocrisy of his words was breathtaking. He was coaching me, trying to manage me, to ensure I didn't say anything that might implicate them. He thought I was a fragile, grieving fool, easily manipulated. It was the most insulting and most helpful assumption he could have made. What should I do, Mark? I asked, playing the helpless widow. Just cooperate, he said. his voice dropping into a more serious conspiratorial tone. "But listen to me, Alara. Be careful what you say about anything. You've been under a lot of stress. Grief can make people confused, make them imagine things. The police might try to twist your words. Don't mention anything about David's finances or the insurance. It's not relevant, and it will only complicate things and make you look unstable." He was telling me to hide the motive. He was preemptively discrediting me, planting the idea that I was an unreliable narrator of my own life. It was a clear, calculated attempt at witness tampering. I looked at Detective Miller. Her face was a stony mask, but her pen was flying across the page of her notebook. "Okay, Mark," I whispered. "Okay, I'll be careful." "Good girl," he said, the words dripping with condescension. "We'll sort this out. Lena and I will look into flights to come get you as soon as they let you go. We'll take care of everything. Just hang in there. We love you." The line went dead. The silence in the room was profound. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my body trembling with the aftermath of the performance. I had held a conversation with the two people who had murdered my husband and tried to murder my children, and I had survived. More than that, I had beaten them at their own game. Detective Miller looked up from her notes, her expression no longer skeptical. It was hard, focused, and resolute. "He told you not to mention the insurance," she said, her voice flat. "That's obstruction. That's consciousness of guilt." She stood up, her movements crisp and decisive. "I've heard enough. I'm getting a warrant for their financials, their phone records, and a court order to exhume your husband's body for a full toxicological autopsy." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something beyond professional duty in her eyes. It was a fierce, protective empathy. "You and your children are not going to your sister's house, Mrs. Vance. You're going to be in protective custody, and we are going to get them." The war had begun, and thanks to their own arrogance, I had just won the first battle. The hours that followed were a blur of logistics and quiet, contained chaos. I was moved, along with Leo and Maya, to a nondescript hotel room, the kind that exists in a state of perpetual anonymity near every airport in America. 2 plainclothes officers were stationed in the room next door, and another sat in a car in the parking lot below. We were a protected package, assets in an unfolding investigation. My children, remarkably resilient, saw it all as a grand adventure. A hotel with a pool, room service for dinner. It was a vacation to them. I watched them splash in the chlorinated water, their laughter echoing in the humid air of the indoor pool, and I felt a strange and painful disconnect. I was their mother, their protector, the center of their world, yet my mind was 1,000,000 miles away, in a place of darkness they couldn't possibly comprehend. I was treading water, both literally and figuratively, trying to keep my head above the surface of my own terror and grief. Detective Miller became my lifeline. She was a constant, calming presence, updating me in a steady, no-nonsense stream of information. The preliminary lab results on the water bottles came back within hours. "It's a nasty piece of work, Alara," she told me over the phone, the first time she had used my first name. "A custom cocktail. The primary agent is aconitine, derived from the wolfsbane plant. It's fast-acting, causes cardiac arrest, and is notoriously difficult to trace in standard autopsies unless you're specifically looking for it. There are also traces of a synthetic beta blocker likely to amplify the effect on the heart. This wasn't amateur hour. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Aconitine. The word was ugly, alien. I thought of my sister, a dedicated gardener, her prize-winning delphiniums and monkshood, wolfsbane, lining her pristine flower beds. She had always said she had a talent for making things grow. It turned out she also had a talent for making things die. The confirmation, as sickening as it was, strengthened my resolve. The last vestiges of doubt, of hope that I was somehow wrong, were burned away. This was not a nightmare I would wake up from. This was my new reality. The next day, the warrants were executed. A team of officers descended on Lena and Mark's immaculate suburban home. Miller called me to walk me through it. We have their phones, their computers. We're searching the house and the garden shed. Mark's office is also being searched. He owns a small chemical supply company. Did you know that? I hadn't. He had always been vague about his work, calling himself a logistics consultant. A chemical supply company, the beta blocker. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Mark had the access, the knowledge. Lena had the delivery system, the garden, the tea, the cloying sisterly affection. They were a team, a partnership in murder. The most interesting thing we found, Miller continued, her voice tight with satisfaction, was on Mark's computer. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. He had a hidden folder with financial projections. Projections based on the acquisition of a significant new asset in the next quarter. The asset value, $2 million. The exact amount of David's life insurance policy. It was the digital smoking gun, a clear indication of premeditation. They had been planning this, banking on it. My family's lives were nothing more than a line item on a spreadsheet. While the police machine ground forward, my life was suspended in the strange limbo of the hotel room. I filled the hours with a forced, cheerful normalcy for the kids. We built pillow forts, watched cartoons, and ordered pizza. I read Leo his bedtime story, my voice even and soothing, while inside I felt like I was screaming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face, the way he looked the morning of the day he died, smiling at me over his coffee cup. A cup that likely held the dregs of Lena's poisoned tea. The grief I had been processing for the past 6 weeks transformed. It was no longer a soft, aching sorrow. It became a hard, sharp-edged rage, a fuel that burned away my fear. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness. I was the one who had survived to tell the story. 2 days after we landed, Detective Miller came to the hotel room herself. Her face was grim, but her eyes held a spark of triumph. "We got the court order," she said, sitting across from me at the small table. "We exhumed David's body this morning. The medical examiner is prioritizing the toxicology screening. We should have the results by tomorrow." The thought of David's body, his final resting place, being disturbed was a fresh wave of pain. But it was a necessary violation. It was for justice, for him. And, she continued, leaning forward slightly, the anonymous tip, we traced it. It wasn't untraceable after all, just cleverly masked. It came from a burner phone, purchased for cash at a gas station 100 miles from their home. But the phone was activated using a credit card belonging to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. The name meant nothing to me. "Who is she?" "She was Mark's executive assistant," Miller explained. "He fired her 3 weeks ago. Apparently, she was let go without cause, made to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We paid her a visit. She was terrified, But once we guaranteed her immunity, she talked. She said Mark had been acting erratically for months, obsessed with his financial losses. She said she overheard him on the phone with Lena, talking about a permanent solution to their money problems, talking about David's generous policy. She didn't know the details, but she knew something was wrong. She saw Mark researching tasteless, odorless poisons on his work computer. When he fired her, she was scared. But when she saw my face on the news, a local story about David's tragic, unexpected death, she put it all together. She was too afraid to come to the police herself, afraid Mark would come after her. But she couldn't live with the thought of what they might do next. She knew you were flying to them with the children. She made the call. So it wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a random act of fate that had saved us. It was a woman I had never met, a woman who had lost her job, but not her conscience. A stranger had saved my children's lives. The knowledge was both humbling and terrifying. It underscored how close we had come, how easily Lena and Mark's plan could have succeeded. The next afternoon, Miller called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of steel. "We got it, Alara. The tox report is back. David's system was flooded with aconitine. The ME said it's a miracle he lasted as long as he did. The official cause of death has been changed. It's no longer a heart attack, it's homicide." The word landed with the force of a physical blow. Homicide. My husband was murdered. I had known it, felt it in my bones, but hearing it stated as a cold, official fact was different. It was real. It was undeniable. "We're moving on them now," Miller said. "The arrest warrants have been issued. It's time." I asked her a question, the answer to which I already knew, but I needed to hear it. "What happens now?" "Now," Detective Miller said, her voice dropping, "you get ready, because we're going to need you to face them." The thought sent a chill down my spine, colder than any fear I had felt before. I had to face them. I had to look into the eyes of my sister, the woman who had shared my childhood, and see a murderer. I had to be the voice for the man she had silenced forever. The plan Detective Miller laid out was audacious and fraught with psychological peril, but I understood its necessity. They had a strong circumstantial case, the motive, the means, the opportunity, the digital trail, the tox report. But Lena and Mark were smart, calculating. They would have the best lawyers their stolen money could buy. They would paint me as an unstable, grieving widow, lashing out at the only family she had left. They would try to discredit Sarah Jenkins, the disgruntled ex-employee. A confession, Miller explained, would be the final unbreakable lock on their prison doors. "They're arrogant, Alara," she said, her voice firm. "Mark's conversation with you on the phone proves it. They believe they can outsmart us. We're going to use that arrogance against them. We're going to let them think they still have a chance to control the narrative." The strategy was to release them after their initial arrest. Officially, it would be pending further investigation, a legal maneuver to lull them into a false sense of security. They would be released on bail, their passports confiscated, but they would be allowed to return home. A home that was now bristling with covert listening devices and surveillance cameras installed while they were in custody. Then I would go to them. It was the part of the plan that made my blood run cold. I would go to their house with the children, just as I had originally intended. I would be wearing a wire. The goal was to pretend I had been cleared, that the entire incident on the plane was now being treated as a cruel but unrelated prank. I was to play the part of the distraught sister and sister-in-law, seeking comfort in the arms of the only family I had left. My role was to make them feel safe, to make them believe I was still their pawn, and to guide the conversation toward David, toward their finances, toward the truth. I would be the bait in the trap. "You don't have to do this," Miller assured me, her eyes searching mine. "We can proceed without it, but it will make the case ironclad." I thought of David. I thought of Leo and Maya sleeping peacefully in the next room, their lives saved by a stranger's courage. There was no choice. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. The day of the confrontation was surreal. I dressed myself and the children in the clothes we had been wearing on the plane, a deliberate piece of psychological stagecraft. I felt like an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. A technician fitted me with a small, discreet wire, taping it to my skin. The listening device was no bigger than a button. "We'll hear everything," the tech assured me. "You'll have a dozen officers within a 30-second radius. You just have to give the takedown signal if you feel you're in danger." The safe phrase is, "I could really use a cup of that special tea." The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. An unmarked police van, filled with monitors and tactical officers, would be parked down the street. Miller would be in my ear via a tiny flesh-colored earpiece, though she promised to speak only in an absolute emergency. For all intents and purposes, once I walked through that door, I would be on my own. The drive to Lena and Mark's house was the longest of my life. Every tree-lined street, every familiar landmark of the town I had visited 100 times, looked alien and menacing. The kids, excited to finally be out of the hotel, chattered in the back seat, oblivious. A plainclothes officer drove us, his presence a silent, reassuring weight. When we pulled into their driveway, I saw them standing on the porch, Lena and Mark. They had been released from custody just hours before. They looked tired, strained, but they arranged their faces into expressions of profound relief and welcome. Lena rushed down the steps as I got the kids out of the car. "Alara, oh thank God!" she cried, wrapping me in a hug. It took every ounce of my self-control not to recoil. Her embrace felt like a cage of snakes. Her scent, the familiar lavender perfume she always wore, was nauseating. Mark hung back, his arms crossed, a more cautious smile on his face. His eyes were scanning, assessing. "We were so worried," Lena said, pulling back, her hands on my shoulders. "What a nightmare. Are you okay? The police told us they let you go, that it was all a false alarm." "I'm fine," I managed to say, my voice a passable imitation of weary relief. "They think it was some kind of sick prank. They're still investigating, but they said we weren't the target." I was feeding them the story we had concocted, the lie that would hopefully make them let down their guard. We went inside. The house was exactly as I remembered it, immaculately, clean, tastefully decorated in shades of gray and beige, a monument to their carefully constructed image of success. But now I saw the darkness lurking beneath the polished surfaces. Every family photo on the wall felt like a grotesque mockery. There was one of them with me and David, all of us smiling on a beach vacation. We looked so happy, so normal. I felt a pang of grief so sharp it almost buckled my knees. I was standing in the home of my husband's killers. I led the kids to the guest room, a room I had stayed in countless times before. "Why don't you two play in here for a little while?" I said, my voice bright and false. "Auntie Lena and I need to talk." I closed the door, leaving them in a world of innocence, and walked back into a world of pure evil. I found Lena and Mark in the kitchen. Lena was fussing at the stove, making coffee. Mark was leaning against the counter, watching me. "I still can't believe it," Lena said, shaking her head. "That someone would be so cruel. To target a family. To target you, after everything you've been through." "The police were intense," I said, sitting down at the kitchen island. I let my shoulders slump, trying to look defeated and small. They asked so many questions about David, about the insurance. I watched their faces carefully. Lena's hand paused for a fraction of a second as she reached for the coffee mugs. Mark's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "That's ridiculous," Mark scoffed, pushing himself off the counter. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I told you they'd try to twist things, Alara. They're just looking for someone to blame." "I know," I said, looking down at my hands. It was just hard, talking about him, about the money. It felt like they were accusing me of something. "They're ghouls," Lena said, her voice filled with venom as she set a mug of coffee in front of me. "They have no respect for the grieving process." I looked down at the dark liquid, my stomach turning. "It's just that money," I continued, my voice a near whisper. "It feels cursed now. David wanted it to protect us, but it just seems to bring trouble." I looked up, my eyes meeting Mark's. "You were right, Mark. It's a lot of money, more than I know what to do with." Mark's eyes lit up with a faint, predatory gleam. He thought I was opening the door, asking for his financial advice again. He thought he still had me. "Well, that's what family is for," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We'll help you manage it, invest it properly, make it grow. It's what David would have wanted." The casual, possessive way he spoke about David's money, the money he had killed for, sent a current of pure hatred through me. The time for subtlety was over. It was time to spring the trap. "He was so healthy, you know," I said softly, my gaze distant, as if lost in memory. "The doctors were so surprised. A man his age, his heart just stopping. It never made sense to me." Lena, who had been bustling around the kitchen, suddenly went very still. Her back was to me, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. "Grief does strange things to the heart, Alara," Mark said carefully, his eyes narrowed. "The stress, it can be a silent killer." "I suppose," I said. I took a deep breath. "It's funny, the police mentioned something about the toxicology report. They said they were going to run a new one, a more comprehensive one, just to officially rule out any other factors. Isn't that strange?" The clatter of a ceramic spoon hitting the tiled floor was deafening in the sudden silence. Lena had dropped it. She didn't turn around. "Why would they do that?" she asked, her voice thin and reedy. "It's just a formality," I said, my voice hardening slightly, the mask of the victim beginning to slip. "But it did get me thinking about that tea you used to give him, Lena. The special herbal tea for his heart. He drank it every single night." Lena slowly turned around. Her face was as white as a sheet. The mask of the caring sister had shattered, and for the first time, I saw the raw, panicked fear beneath. Mark shot her a look, a silent, furious warning. He stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Alara, you're exhausted," he said, his voice a low, menacing purr. "You're not thinking clearly. You're starting to sound paranoid. Maybe you should go lie down." I pulled my arm away from his grasp. I stood up, my entire body trembling, not with fear, but with a righteous, liberating fury. I looked directly at my sister. "What was in the tea, Lena?" I asked, my voice ringing with clarity in the silent kitchen. "What did you give my husband?" The question hung in the air, a declaration of war. The carefully constructed facade of their suburban sanctuary crumbled in an instant. Lena's face, which had been a mask of feigned sympathy, contorted into something ugly and unrecognizable. Panic warred with fury in her eyes. Mark moved to stand beside her, a united front of deceit. His arm went around her waist, a gesture that was less about comfort and more about control. "Elara, stop it," he hissed, his voice dropping its smooth, reassuring tone and taking on a hard, dangerous edge. "You're hysterical, you're grieving, and you're not making any sense. We are your family. We are the only people who have been here for you." "Were you here for David?" I shot back, my voice rising, sharp and clear. "Were you here for him the night he died, Lena? After he drank the last cup of tea you made for him?" I took a step closer to my sister, my gaze unwavering. I wanted her to see the abyss that had opened between us. I wanted her to know that I saw her, the real her, the monster hiding behind the face of my childhood companion. "You know it's funny," I continued, the words spilling out, fueled by months of suppressed grief and a white-hot rage. "I always admired your garden, especially the monkshood. Such beautiful purple flowers. Deadly, though. Isn't that right, Lena? Aconite, a poison so potent, so hard to trace. It just looks like a heart attack, a perfect, tragic heart attack." Lena flinched as if I had struck her. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked, gasping sound came out. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with terror, silently begging him to fix this, to make it go away. Mark, ever the aggressor, took a step toward me. His face was a thunderous mask of indignation. "That's enough. You are unwell, Elara. You're making wild, insane accusations. You need help. I'm going to call a doctor." It was a threat, a clear one. He was trying to frame me as mentally incompetent, to have me institutionalized, silenced. He was trying to regain control. But I held my ground. The tiny device taped to my skin was my shield, my secret weapon. I knew a dozen officers were listening to every word, their hands ready. "You won't be calling anyone, Mark," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Because it's over. The police aren't investigating a prank. They're investigating a double homicide, one that was successful and one that you failed to complete." The color drained from Mark's face. The arrogant confidence that had been his armor evaporated, leaving behind the raw, pathetic fear of a cornered animal. "You're bluffing," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," I said, "I'm not. They exhumed David's body. They ran a new tox screen. They found it, Lena. They found your special ingredient." At the mention of David's exhumation, Lena finally broke. A terrible, guttural sob tore from her throat. It wasn't a sound of grief or remorse. It was the sound of defeat. "He was going to leave me," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged thing. The confession, when it came, was a torrent of venom and resentment that had been festering for years. Mark lost everything, our money, our house, everything. We were going to be ruined. And you had it all. Perfect David, the perfect kids, the perfect life. You never had to worry about a thing. her eyes blazing with a terrifying, jealous light, fixed on me. David was going to give Mark a loan, a pitiful little handout to save us. A loan, after everything we'd done for him, for you. It was an insult. And then Mark found out about the insurance policy. It was so much money, Alara, enough to solve all our problems, enough to give us the life we deserved. So you killed him, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You poisoned my husband, your friend. He looked down on us, Mark spat, his voice trembling with a pathetic, self-pitying rage. He always did, with his perfect job and his perfect family. He pitied me. The money was just leveling the playing field. It was justice. And my children, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Were they leveling the playing field too? What kind of justice involves putting poison in a 5-year-old's water bottle? That was the moment, the final damning admission. Neither of them answered. They couldn't. Their silence was a confession in itself, an acknowledgement of an evil so profound there were no words to excuse it. I looked from my sister's tear-streaked, contorted face to her husband's pale, sweating one. I saw nothing of the family I had known. They were strangers, hollowed out by greed and envy. I had my confession. I had what Detective Miller needed. I slowly raised my hand and touched my collarbone, a prearranged signal that I was not in immediate physical danger, but that the conversation had reached its conclusion. I was about to say the takedown phrase to end this waking nightmare, but I needed one more thing. I needed to say goodbye to the sister I thought I had. I loved you, Lena, I said, and the simple truth of it was the most painful thing I had uttered. You were all I had left. For a flicker of a second, I saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of the girl I grew up with, a flash of shame, of horror at what she had become. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, extinguished by the poison of her own making. The front door burst open. It didn't splinter. It was opened with a key, a silent, swift invasion. Detective Miller stepped in first, her gun drawn but pointed at the floor. She was followed by a half-dozen uniformed officers, a wave of blue and black that filled the pristine foyer. Lena and Mark Vance, Miller's voice boomed, sharp and official, cutting through the thick tension in the kitchen. You are under arrest for the murder of David Miller and the attempted murder of Leo and Maya Vance. Lena let out a final despairing wail as an officer pulled her hands behind her back and snapped handcuffs onto her wrists. Mark stood frozen, his mouth agape, his face a mask of utter shock and disbelief. He had truly believed he could get away with it. His arrogance was so complete, so profound, that the reality of his failure was something his mind simply could not process. As they were led away, their heads bowed in a sudden, shocking transformation. From predators to prey, Lena's eyes met mine one last time. They were filled with a toxic brew of hatred, self-pity, and a sliver of pathetic bewilderment. She still didn't understand. She would never understand the line she had crossed, the sacred trust she had incinerated. I stood alone in the silent kitchen, the ghost of my family's laughter and love, now a permanent, chilling echo in the air. The wire on my chest felt heavy, a small piece of technology that had captured the implosion of my entire world. It was over. The confrontation was done, but the silence that followed felt less like peace and more like the quiet, desolate aftermath of a war. The weeks and months that followed were a landscape of legal proceedings, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from rubble. The trial was a media sensation, a local tragedy that captured the national imagination. The story had all the elements of a primetime thriller: a beautiful, grieving widow, a shocking betrayal by her only sister, a dramatic mid-flight rescue, and a cold-blooded plot born of suburban envy and greed. I was shielded from the worst of it by Detective Miller and the prosecutor's office, but I couldn't escape it entirely. My face was on the news, my name a headline. I became the pilot's announcement widow, a label that felt both bizarre and reductive. I had to testify. Standing in the courtroom, looking at Lena and Mark sitting at the defendant's table, was the hardest thing I had ever done. They had lost weight. Their faces were sallow and drawn. The confident, successful couple they had pretended to be was gone, replaced by two diminished, hollow-eyed figures in ill-fitting suits. They avoided my gaze. They couldn't look at me as I recounted the story, my voice steady and clear, for the jury. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had the toxicology reports from David's body, a perfect match to the poison found in the children's water bottles. They had Sarah Jenkins's brave testimony. They had Mark's financial projections, a digital blueprint for murder, and they had the recording. The centerpiece of the trial was the audio from the wire I had worn. They played it in open court, the sound of my sisters' and brother-in-law's voices filling the silent room. Their lies, their manipulations, their condescension, and finally, their horrific, hate-filled confessions echoed off the wood-paneled walls. As her own shrieking words, "He was going to leave me. We were going to be ruined," played back, Lena finally broke down, her sobs the only sound in the rapt courtroom. Mark just sat there, staring blankly ahead, a man completely disconnected from the consequences of his own actions. The defense tried to argue that I had entrapped them, that I had manipulated a distraught and financially stressed couple into saying things they didn't mean. They tried to paint Lena as a victim of Mark's coercive control, but no one on the jury was buying it. They had heard the venom in her voice, the chilling clarity of her motive. They saw the partnership for what it was, a union of weakness and wickedness. The verdict came back in less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Attempted murder, conspiracy. The judge sentenced them both to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no dramatic outburst, no final plea for mercy. They were led away in silence, their existence reduced to a legal footnote. Justice had been served, but it brought me no joy. There was no sense of victory, only a profound and hollow sadness. My sister, the only family I had left, was going to die in a prison cell. My children had lost their aunt and uncle, their cousins, their entire extended family in one fell swoop. I sold our house, the one David and I had built together. It was too full of ghosts, both good and bad. I couldn't sleep in our bed without thinking of the poison that had slowly been seeping into his system. I couldn't look at my own garden without seeing Lena's monk's hood. With the insurance money, the blood money that I now saw as David's final act of protecting us, I bought a small house in a different state, a place where no one knew our story, where we could be anonymous, a place to heal. We started over. Leo and Maya were young enough that the trauma, for them, was muted. They knew Auntie Lena and Uncle Mark had done something bad and had to go away. They missed them sometimes in the simple, uncomplicated way that children miss people who were once a part of their lives. I never told them the full truth, not yet. One day, when they are old enough to understand the complexities of human darkness, I will. But for now, I am focused on filling their lives with light, with love, with a sense of safety that was so nearly stolen from them. I think about the pilot, Captain Evans, a man I never saw again after that day on the tarmac. I think about Maria, the flight attendant, whose quiet nod of support was a small beacon in the darkest hour. I think about Sarah Jenkins, the woman whose conscience saved us. I sent her a letter once through the prosecutor's office, trying to express a gratitude that felt too enormous for words. She never replied, and I understood. She wanted to move on, to put the darkness behind her. We all did. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the children are sleeping, I sit and think about trust. I think about how fragile it is, how easily it can be shattered. Lena and Mark didn't just try to kill us, they tried to kill my ability to ever trust another human being again. For a long time, I thought they had succeeded. I was suspicious of everyone, wary of kindness, seeing ulterior motives in every friendly gesture. But then I look at my children, at their open, trusting faces, and I know I can't live like that. I cannot let what Lena and Mark did poison my soul as they poisoned my husband. To live in a world without trust is another kind of prison, and I will not let them put me there. My life is quiet now. It is small and simple. It is filled with the mundane rhythms of school runs, bedtime stories, and scraped knees. And in that simplicity, I have found a measure of peace. The grief for David is still there, a constant companion, but it is no longer a sharp, raging thing. It has softened into a gentle ache, a reminder of a great love that was stolen, but a love that still defines me, that still guides me. The world is not a safe place. I know that now in a way I never did before. Evil can wear a familiar face. It can hug your children and call you sister. But I also know that courage can come from a stranger on a burner phone. Kindness can come from a flight attendant's eyes, and strength, a strength you never knew you possessed, can be found in the deepest wells of a mother's love. My children are my reason, my purpose, my proof that life goes on. They are David's legacy. And protecting them, loving them, and teaching them to see the good in the world without being blind to the bad is the most important work of my life. The pilot's announcement that day, a moment of pure terror, was ultimately a moment of salvation. It was the sound of a plot unraveling, of a dark secret being dragged into the light. It was the beginning of the end of a nightmare and the start of a long, hard road back to life. A life I am so grateful every single day to be living. Healing is not a linear process. It's a messy, unpredictable journey with days of bright, hopeful sunshine and sudden, unexpected storms. For a long time after the trial, I was adrift. The singular focus of seeking justice had sustained me, but once that was over, I was left with the vast, empty space of what came next. I was a widow and a single mother, living in a new town where the ghosts were of my own making. I saw Lena's face in the checkout line at the grocery store. I heard Mark's condescending laugh in a stranger's voice at the park. The trauma had sunk its hooks deep into my psyche, and I knew I couldn't fight it alone. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, patient woman who helped me unpack the tangled mess of my grief, rage, and betrayal. We talked about David, not as a victim, but as the man he was, his ridiculous dad jokes, his unwavering optimism, the way he could always make me feel safe, even when the world felt chaotic. Speaking about him, celebrating him, was a way of reclaiming him from the sordid narrative of his death. It was a way of ensuring that his legacy was one of love, not murder. We also talked about Lena. This was harder. How do you mourn someone who is still alive, but is, for all intents and purposes, dead to you? How do you reconcile the sister who taught you how to ride a bike with the woman who steeped poison in a teacup? My therapist called it ambiguous loss, a grief with no closure. I had to learn to hold two opposing truths at once, the love for the sister I had and the horror of the woman she became. I had to accept that I would likely never understand the why of it, not really. The jealousy and greed she confessed to felt like a flimsy, inadequate explanation for the sheer monstrosity of her actions. There was a darkness in her, a void that I had never seen, and trying to comprehend it was like staring into the sun. It would only blind me. The children were my true north. Their needs, their schedules, their simple, profound joys kept me anchored in the present. Leo joined the school soccer team, and I became a sideline, Mom cheering until my voice was hoarse. Maya discovered a passion for painting, and our kitchen became a permanent gallery of her vibrant, messy creations. In their laughter, in their resilience, I found my own. They remembered their Aunt Lena and Uncle Mark, but their memories were beginning to fade, softened by time and the creation of new, happier ones. One day, about a year after the trial, I received a letter. It was from the prison where Lena was incarcerated. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. I almost threw it away, unopened. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with her, to sever the final tie, but another part, a weaker, more foolish part perhaps, needed to know what she had to say. I opened it. The letter was short, written in her familiar, perfect cursive. It was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was a complaint. She complained about the food, about the guards, about the other inmates. She wrote as if she were the victim, a person wronged by an unjust system. She blamed Mark. She blamed her financial losses. She even blamed David for not being more generous. In a letter full of self-pity, she never once mentioned my name or the children's. We were an inconvenient detail in the tragedy of her own life. Reading it was a strange kind of gift. It cauterized the wound, the faint, lingering hope that somewhere inside her was the sister I knew, a person capable of remorse, died. The woman who wrote that letter was a stranger, a narcissist so consumed by her own grievances that she was incapable of seeing the devastation she had wrought. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and let the wind carry them away, and with them I let her go. My life began to expand again, slowly at first, then with more confidence. I made friends, other moms from the school. I joined a book club. I started gardening again, a hobby I had shared with Lena and had abandoned after everything happened. I planted roses and hydrangeas and sunflowers, bright, cheerful flowers with no hidden meanings, no deadly secrets. I found that my hands in the soil, nurturing new life, was a form of therapy in itself. I even started dating, a tentative step back into a world I thought I had left behind forever. He was a kind man, a history teacher and a widower himself, with a gentle smile and sad, understanding eyes. He knew my story. It was impossible to hide in the age of the internet. But he didn't treat me like a fragile piece of glass. He treated me like a woman. It was new and scary, and I don't know where it will lead, but it felt like a new chapter, a possibility of happiness that I had thought was forever denied to me. One evening, years after the flight, I was tucking Maya into bed. She was 10 now, on the cusp of becoming a young woman. She looked at me with her serious, thoughtful eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever miss Auntie Lena?" The question came out of the blue, as they so often do with children. I sat on the edge of her bed, my heart giving a familiar pang. I chose my words carefully. "I miss the person I thought she was," I said honestly. "I miss having a sister, but the person she became, she was very sick in her heart, sweetie, and she did a terrible, terrible thing. So no, I don't miss her, but I am sad about it. There's a difference." She seemed to understand. She nodded, and then she said something that showed me just how strong and wise she was. "It's okay, Mom, you have us." She reached out and took my hand. In that moment, holding my daughter's hand, the future felt clear. My family was not destroyed. It had been attacked, it had been betrayed, it had been irrevocably altered. But it was not destroyed. My family was right here, in this room. It was me, Leo, and Maya. It was the memory of David, a love that was strong enough to transcend death. We were survivors. We were a family forged in fire, and the bonds that held us together were unbreakable. The world was still full of uncertainty, but of this I was sure. We were going to be okay. As the years passed, the sharp edges of the trauma softened into a scar, a permanent part of my history, but no longer a constantly weeping wound. Leo and Maya grew into teenagers, their lives filled with the normal dramas of high school, friendships, and first crushes. They knew the basic facts of what had happened, that their aunt and uncle had been responsible for their father's death and had tried to harm them, but we rarely spoke of it. It was a dark foundation upon which we had managed to build a bright and sturdy house. I made a conscious choice to focus on life, on creation, on moving forward. I went back to school and got my degree in landscape design, turning my therapeutic hobby into a profession. I found immense satisfaction in creating spaces of beauty and peace for other people, in transforming barren yards into vibrant gardens. It felt like a small act of defiance against the ugliness that had tried to consume my world. My relationship with the history teacher, Ben, deepened into a steady, quiet love. He was the calm to my once stormy seas. His teenage children and mine formed a chaotic, blended family, filling my quiet house with noise, laughter, and life. There were moments, of course, when the past would intrude. A new story about a family betrayal, a movie with a poisoning plot. These things could still send a chill down my spine. And every time I boarded an airplane for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, I would hear the echo of that pilot's voice. "Elara Vance, please come forward." It was a phantom limb, an ache that would likely never fully disappear. When Leo was 17, he came to me one afternoon. He was a man now taller than me, with David's kind eyes and steady gaze. He had been working on a history project, and I saw the open laptop on his desk. My name was in the search bar. He had been reading the old news articles. "I read it all, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. The real story about the tea, the water bottles, the trial, everything. I sat down, my heart heavy, preparing myself for the anger, the questions, the confusion. But he looked at me, and his eyes were not filled with horror or rage. They were filled with a profound, aching understanding. I can't believe how strong you were," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were all alone and you saved us." He came and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. And in that moment, I wasn't the strong one. I let myself cry, great heaving sobs for the husband I had lost, for the sister who had betrayed me, for the innocence that had been stolen from my children. I cried for the lonely, terrified woman I had been, sitting on that airplane, suspended between heaven and earth, her entire world collapsing around her. Leo just held me, patting my back, a son comforting his mother, the roles reversed. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "You don't have to be strong all the time. We're here now." That conversation opened a door. We began to talk about it more as a family. Maya, with her artist's soul, had more abstract emotional questions. We talked about how people can be driven to do terrible things, about the corrosive nature of jealousy, about forgiveness. I told them that forgiveness was not about excusing what Lena and Mark had done, but about refusing to let their actions continue to poison our lives. It was about releasing the bitterness, not for their sake, but for our own. Last year, I received another letter, this time from the prison chaplain. He informed me that Lena had passed away from cancer. She had refused treatment. The news was strange. There was no grief, only a quiet, somber sense of an ending. A chapter, a dark and painful one, was finally, truly closed. I never heard what became of Mark. I imagine he is still in prison, a bitter old man haunted by the ghosts of his own greed. I try not to think of him. He is a footnote in a story that is no longer about him. It is about us. My story did not end on that airplane. In many ways, it began. I learned that the human heart is more resilient than we can ever imagine. I learned that love is a more powerful force than hate. And I learned that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, there is always the possibility of a new dawn. Today, my garden is in full bloom. The roses are a riot of color, and the sunflowers stand tall, their faces turned toward the sun. My children are happy and healthy, on the verge of starting their own lives. I have a partner who loves me, a job that brings me joy, and a peace I once thought was lost forever. The scars are still there, a map of where I have been. But they do not define me. I am not just a survivor. I am a woman who has lived, and that is a victory that no one can ever take away from me. The pilot's voice may echo in my memory, but the sound I choose to listen to is the laughter of my children, a sound that is and always will be the sweetest music in the world.